All right, so I think we're ready to get started here for our webinar on risk management for business owners. And specifically, is your business prepared for sudden death, incapacitation, or disability? We hosted an event on this exact same topic a few months ago, back in February. It was a dinner event at the Capitol Grill in Chestnut Hill. And the response for the event was so incredible, so well attended. We actually had a waiting list of individuals that really wanted to make it, and others who wanted to come but couldn't make that date. So we decided to, as a follow-on to that event, put this webinar together to cover the same subject matter for those who weren't able to make it and who wanted to learn more. So what we'll talk about today with me today, we have Tiffany O'Connell with O'Connell Law. And she'll be talking about estate planning and the impact that aspect has for owners, and the importance of planning and protecting the family as well as the business. We also have Joshua French with Nutter, and Josh will be talking about the business side and some of the key aspects for protecting your business and legal structures to have in place, operating agreements to have in place, and all the important aspects there. But it all ties together as we're going through this. Feel free to send your questions through the chat, and Lauren on our team here will be looking for those questions and will let us know. We don't want to wait till the end of the webinar to field questions. We want to just kind of keep this conversational and informal and let questions pour in. We'll try to answer them as they come in so that we can keep this as a dialogue. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over, Tiff, if it's okay. I'll turn it over to you, and if you want to maybe just give a quick background on how how you fit in when it comes to protecting businesses in this aspect on the estate planning, that'd be great.
Yeah, happy to, Jonathan. So, hi everyone. I'm Tiff O'Connell, and I'm the CEO for O'Connell Law, which is a boutique estate planning and elder law firm in Natick, Massachusetts. So, estate planning does really tie into this because our topic today is really talking about if the business owner needs to step out unexpectedly. Right. And so for estate planning, when we're doing estate planning not just for planning for when someone passes and making sure things are appropriate then, but also for planning in case someone's living, but they can no longer take care of things. And so there'll be different estate planning tools I'll mention here, but my role as the estate planning attorney is to make sure that I'm counseling clients and making sure that we have the appropriate legal documents in place. So that way we can make sure that upon something happening, that someone can immediately legally step in and handle things. I'm also going to be talking this afternoon about how making sure assets are aligned with someone's estate plan is crucial, just because the legal documents, yes, those are essential, but actually making sure that someone's assets, and that includes the business, are actually aligned with someone's estate plan.
Great.
So Jonathan, you want me to pass it on to Josh?
Yeah, that'd be well. And I just will I think give a little bit better context to how our process fits in with that before I turn it over to Josh. So, as a wealth management firm, we help families with financial planning and investment management. It's a big part of what we do, but we also work with a lot of companies and business owners, CEOs in particular. And this topic was top of mind for so many. I just wanted to I forgot to cover that on why this whole subject matter came about. We were speaking with our business owner clients really at kind of the end of last year in December, and did a survey among those business owner clients on what topics were so top of mind for them and concerning for them. And this topic seemed to be among the top concerning for a lot of owners, on just decentralizing the owner, protecting the owner in the event of, incapacitation, not only to the risk management side of it, but also making the company more valuable. And we'll talk about that today as well, how the company actually can become more valuable if it's not so owner dependent. With that, yeah, I'd like to turn it over to Josh. And Josh, if you could give a little background on your end.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining on a Wednesday afternoon. I'm my role as a partner in the corporate group here at Nutter. I work a lot with companies throughout their life cycle, from the earliest stage. A couple of folks in their dorm room have an idea. Through the entirety of the life cycle, their financing process, and their eventual, hopefully successful exit. I call it death, but we've got Tiff here, so I don't want to confuse things. So I see folks in different stages, and part of my job is to help you think almost like a family lawyer might, right? The documents that we're putting together are almost your business prenup, and putting together a stockholders agreement to really help you think about, okay, we've got these great plans and this is all going to be great, but if things don't work out, or how do we make sure that there are sort of checks and balances to ensure that we are truly aligned. And so we'll have very specific conversations from the earliest stage to put together agreements that will hopefully seek to identify potential issues down the road so that you're not in a stalemate situation. The worst thing that can happen for me to deal with, and for your business, is to have a business with two co-owners who have equal economic and voting rights in the business, that haven't thought through what happens if we don't agree, and you have a material business issue that you're just completely at odds on, and it's not clear how the business will move forward. That's problematic, and it affects the overall success of the business enterprise. So trying to come up with game plans on how to deal with that's where I step in, and try to facilitate those conversations.
Excellent. So Josh, I guess while we have you, one of the questions that I know probably comes up a lot is, when the company is deciding on what structure makes sense, S Corp or C Corp or LLC, what are some of the, I guess, most important, typical common considerations, planning considerations around that decision?
Yeah, that's a question that we deal with pretty much day in, day out, right? Choice of entity. And for me, I deal with companies that fit a variety of buckets, right? Your sort of family-run business that is only going to be owned by a couple of folks who are related, and it's going to be less focused on raising money from outside investors and more just building a sustainable business that's going to be that person's lifestyle, and maybe it's being considered to pass on to a next generation, or maybe there's an eventual plan to exit upon the person's natural retirement. That's sort of been one bucket, and then I have other clients who are in the bucket of high tech, life sciences. The only way that this is going to become a success is with substantial outside institutional capital, with a hope of really boosting it up, getting the business to scale within 5 to 7 years, and then selling to a strategic buyer or a financial buyer. So, for the group that's sort of the earlier group, right? The smaller company, the company that's not looking for outside capital very frequently. I would typically lean towards something that would be a pass-through entity for tax purposes, whether that be an LLC or an S corp. Um, the upside of an LLC is it's a lot more flexible and there are fewer tripwires. I'll be very clear, I'm not a tax attorney, but I've had so many deals. A lot of my job deals at the end of businesses life, the exit process.
Yeah.
And every deal that I have that involves the sale of an S corporation, um, the next deal I do that has no issues with the S corporation election will be the first deal I've done that has no issues with the S corporation election, including a deal that I just closed a week ago. There's about a $50 or so million deal for a company that was organized as a limited liability company. So is already getting pass-through treatment, meaning there's no entity level tax, right? If whatever income flows through to your personal tax return. And they received advice from their local CPA. This is not a Boston-based company, just FYI. So no worries for anybody here. But they received advice from a local CPA. Oh, you should really think about making an election to have your LLC taxed as an S corporation, because there were certain employment tax liabilities that they could take advantage of certain treatments, right? And I didn't get into the weeds on it, but long story short, they did this. That resulted in our buyer not being able to go forward with a tax reorganization that they wanted to do to benefit themselves on the deal. So it changed the structure of our overriding transaction, which required us to go to our largest customer to get a consent to the deal, which we were trying to avoid. That was number one. Number two, as part of the diligence efforts, it was identified that there were a variety of missteps involved with this election, including failure to file certain tax forms, which resulted in potential exposure representing almost 10% of the deal value, which we had to negotiate. So I personally have a bias against S corps because of these types of things. If you are well represented, you have a good accountant, a good lawyer with great tax counsel internally, then it can be valuable under certain circumstances. And I've gone way too long on this answer, and I apologize. But just to finish the thought, right? So you asked Jonathan about a C corporation. So that would, of course, mean that you've got an entity level tax, right? The company makes money, the corporation pays income tax, and then when the owners take distributions out of the corporation as dividends, then they pay a tax on that. So why would you do this? You would do this, one, if you're seeking venture capital funding. Almost every institutional venture capital fund that I work with requires that their investments be in C corporations. There's tax related reasons for that. Number two is if you have a C corporation and you are what's called a qualified small business, which is going to be most businesses that are early stage, and you hold that stock for 5 years, and then you sell the stock, you can get up to $10 million of gain tax free, which a lot of people don't know. Now, again, there's more to it than this that is not for this discussion. But at a high level, there's a significant tax benefit if you meet all the standards of qualified small business stock. And in part, these venture investors look for those opportunities. But that's really the only time I would recommend for a company that's starting out to go C corp, at least absent other facts.
Got it.
I'm going to stop talking now because everyone's sick of me.
Thank you. No, thanks. I appreciate that. Very helpful. Um, Tiff, can you talk about, some of just the key estate planning documents that every owner, should have in place? I think that's a good place to start on the estate planning. If you wouldn't mind starting with that.
No, happy to. So on the estate planning side, there are certain key documents that, look, everyone should have, whether you're a business owner or not. And I'm going to start with the incapacity documents. So you're living, but you aren't able to take care of things, not because you're on vacation, but because you no longer have capacity to be able to handle things. So on the financial end, is something called a durable financial power of attorney. This is where you are legally giving someone the legal authority to step into your shoes to handle something for you. Now, on that can be for when we're doing it for estate planning purposes, we're doing it as something called a general durable power of attorney, because the idea is we want that person to be able to step in and do anything for you. So, assuming we've got all business owners here that are listening in, one of the things that you're going to want to make sure of in your durable power of attorney is that it gives authority. And this is assuming that, and when I'm talking about it, I'm more assuming that the business owner is that they haven't decoupled themselves from the business. They are intertwined with the business. The business is them. So therefore, if they're incapacitated, the business could just stop, right?
Right.
So that being the case, you want to make sure that there's definitely the power to deal with business interests in there. So please don't have a durable financial power of attorney that is only 5 pages long, right? Because you need to have a lot of powers in there. Now, a lot of people will say, well, Tiff, there's power to deal with this and this, and I don't even have those assets. And as an estate planning attorney, this is my position on that. My position is my goal is to help you be prepared for what you currently have and what you may have in the future. So the fact that there may be a power to deal with something that you don't currently have doesn't mean that you will never have it. And since we need to do a power of attorney when you have capacity, that means we want to have that power in there now, even if you don't have the asset. So a general power of attorney should be very comprehensive, and it should deal with power to deal with anything and everything you could possibly ever need. Now, a power of attorney could also be limited in scope. Let's say that I'm going on vacation and I'm going to be closing on a property and I need Josh to close for me. I could give him a limited power of attorney to be able to go do that, but I don't want him to be able to handle my bank account, right? So a power of attorney could be limited or general. It depends on the purpose. For estate planning purposes, we're usually doing it for general because we're doing it for now and into the future. So that's one of the documents. The other key document is to deal with health. Now, I'm going to touch on it. This is not to deal with the business, but hey, oftentimes the business owner is the business, so this is still important. You need to make sure you have something called a healthcare proxy. With a healthcare proxy, you're giving the legal authority to someone to make medical decisions for you, again, if you can't. So durable power of attorney, healthcare proxy, essential for incapacity. And then oftentimes people will think of for an estate plan, oh, I need a will. Well, yes, you do. Everyone should have a will, but a will is just a set of instructions that says what should happen upon passing for things that go through the court system through something called probate. Now, I know we'll be talking about how assets should be titled. My goal with clients is even though they need to have a will in case something goes through the court system, or also if they have minor children, to nominate someone to take care of children, if they're no longer living. But a will really is there just to catch things that didn't have somewhere to go because of how it's titled. And again, I'll defer that because I know we'll be talking about that. Then the last thing I just want to touch on is something called a trust. So a trust is, again, just another set of instructions that says what you want to have happen with anything that is titled to it. Depending on what we're dealing with the business, we might be assigning business interests to that trust, right? It's going to really be sitting down with the attorney to discuss what's appropriate or not, tying in with what Josh was talking about with S corp status, which is a tax status. You might hear people saying, oh, don't blow this S status, right? So because basically, unless you're complying with how an S corp is supposed to run, you could end up blowing that corp status and really having a bad tax problem. So when we're doing a trust, we want to make sure there's provisions in there to deal with an S corp status. So we'll have specific instructions in there to deal with that. And then the final thing I just want to mention before I hand it back to Jonathan is that there's two kinds of trusts that you should know about. There's something called a revocable trust with an R and an irrevocable trust with an I. They have very different purposes. A revocable trust is one that you can revoke, or think of it as you can change it because you're keeping full control over whatever that trust says during your life, as well as whatever that trust owns. That's a foundational trust that when people are doing trust planning, that is a trust they will do. Now, depending on what their goals are, depending on what the assets are, they may be tacking onto that and doing something called irrevocable trusts. With that, hence the term, they are irrevocable. Think of it as a one and done. Someone is trying to get rid of an asset, or when I'm seeing it with business owners, they're starting to gift shares slowly over time to say their children or to whoever they want it to go to. But irrevocable trust planning can be a crucial step for a business owner depending on what they're trying to do. So Jonathan, I tried to keep that nice and tight. That
No, that's
was your
great.
estate planning 101, 1 year in hopefully 5 minutes. I hope
You did
Okay.
a better job than me, too.
That's great. Why don't we pause for questions before we go into another topic and just see if anybody listening in here has any questions. You could just send them in through the chat so we can answer them off the bat here. If anybody, and if any of our listeners have any questions, please let us know.
Perfect. And while we're waiting, I actually have one. Just want to know, do you guys have any tips for kind of organizing and keeping track of all these important legal documents you guys need for risk management and preparation?
It's a good question.
You-
I'll kick it off, right? Whatever your one, right? Make sure you've got good advisors across the board, right? Not just legal, but your wealth advisor. If you're dealing with an outside accountant, you want people who you want some redundancy in these things, right? If at all possible. If I'm you, I try to set up a folder, whether it's in a cloud server that's secure, or on a hard drive, whatever, right? That's got, okay, here are my governing documents. Here are my, here is who owns the company. Here are my agreements with my employees, right? The more you can be organized up front, if you go into a process where you're either raising money or selling the business, the more organized you can be on the front end, the better the deal experience will be. Because we all know that business owners are crazy busy all the time, and things occasionally slip through the cracks here and there. But if you can be as organized as possible and be able to put your hands on things that are requested in a timely fashion, it sets the tone for dealing with your counterparty. So a client of mine that is able to respond to a diligence request within a couple of days with a very detailed, hey, here's where everything is, this stuff is not applicable, etc. That makes the process a lot easier. Whereas somebody who's like, well, let me get back to you, or gives partial agreements, things that are unsigned, it just sets this tone of, okay, what's going on here? We've got to really dig in because they don't seem organized. So now I'm worrying about what it is that is missing. So I know that's not a really good tip for how to stay organized, other than to say it's important for you and will save you a lot of money in the long run if you can do your best to try to set up systems early.
Yeah, and then just to tag on to what Josh was talking about there, from when we're counseling our clients for estate planning purposes, we too were like, okay, let's have you get organized. Let's have you get all those key documents in one location, whatever that location might be. So that way, you know, if they become incapacitated or upon passing, those are available for whoever needs to handle. The other key component to me is making sure those key people need to know where those documents are and how they can get access to them.
Yeah.
Right? Because the best laid plan, if it's in a lockbox and no one has a key to it, is really not going to help people. The other thing I'll just mention to also mention for advisors is making sure that your advisors are communicating together, so that way they too can help pick up the baton and carry. And Jonathan, I know that you guys have a wonderful way of keeping things organized, so you probably have some additional thoughts too.
Yeah, thank you. I would add to that with keeping documents organized for all of our clients that have a financial plan. Our planning software has actually an aspect to it where all of the clients' important documents, including estate planning documents, business agreements with their partners, even their life insurance documents, all of those documents can be stored in their portal of their financial plan, so that if God forbid anything happened to the husband or wife, the family knows that they can log in to the planning portal and not only have an understanding of what the plan was and how the whole financial picture looks, but also all those important documents are all saved, in their financial planning in the software, protected, in their protected cloud. So it's just an easy way for them to have access to everything all in one place, and anything can be uploaded there. But we have a whole checklist, a life folio checklist, we call it, where that life folio, it's like a virtual folio that helps the client think of all the things they should be saving there. So, it basically keeps them organized.
Perfect. No, thank you guys. That was incredibly helpful. It looks like we don't have any questions yet, but you guys, attendees, please feel free to send any. We are answering them during the call, but I will pass it back over to you, Jonathan. So yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks, Lauren. Josh, one thing I think that would be helpful just on the topic of risk management, de-risking, that's so important, for for a company. Can you talk a little bit about, buy sell agreements, key person insurance, and how that fits in?
Sure. I mean, this actually ties in some ways, right, to estate/succession planning, right? You've got a business that's got, a couple of key people who are driving the business, and especially if they are, the loss of that person would have a substantial impact on the business. There are products out there, life insurance products, that companies can acquire on the life of the founders. And the idea there, in part, is replacement income for the loss of that person, and or a source of funding to enable the other partner or partners to purchase the deceased partner's share of the business. I have found in closely held businesses, and I'm sure Tiff has had similar situations, Jonathan has had similar situations, that, when something happens, an unexpected death of someone who's still, heavily involved in their business, right? There's a lot going on. The last thing that that anyone, frankly, wants to deal with is a surviving spouse or some other descendant of the deceased partner having to make business decisions, especially for a business that they weren't intimately involved in. So it's always better to think through what happens if there is a death, a disability, an incapacitation,
Yeah.
something that would render the person who is key to the business unable to continue performing. And having an agreement put in place to deal with how to pay that person's estate out, to remove them from the business without having to go through a negotiation, ideally, right? If you can come up with an agreement that puts forth a process, oftentimes I will see it as that the person will be paid at fair market value as determined by a third party valuation expert, or some metric that's agreed to in advance, a multiple of a revenue number or an EBITDA number, something along those lines. I personally tend to recommend having a third party do evaluation analysis at the time, or if there was one done within some reasonable period of time previously, to rely on that. One, it sort of removes all of the interested players from the process. You're relying on somebody else whose job it is to fairly value the company. And then two, it sort of, creates this very clear delineation of, okay, here's what happens, and then here's how we move forward. And as I say, the how to fund that buyout, it can be done through through the proceeds of a key man insurance policy. If that is either insufficient or unavailable, another option is to build into the agreement the ability to pay over time through a promissory note. I'll typically see contracts that give the company a 5 to 7 year window to pay off a departing partner. So those are for me, those are the key things. And any business that is closely held, whatever form it is, LLC, corporation, etc., you should bake in those sort of successor provisions, and not only for things like what I just mentioned, right? Unexpected inability to serve, but frankly also for scenarios where somebody just decides to leave the business, whether it's truly through retirement or they're walking away from the business generally, right? You want to make sure that the company or the other remaining partners have the right to buy that person out, because the last thing you want to have is somebody who's not involved with the company having, a say in the operations or a piece of the economic pie. You want to be able to, sort of remove that person. And if you can build those processes in advance, it makes life easier. If they're not built in advance, you can always negotiate a buyout later, but it creates a leverage issue, and it creates a distraction.
Jonathan, I got a question for you. Especially because of your focus with wealth management and business succession. What mechanisms can people use to help manage cash flow when we're dealing with a company and trying to be able to buy out the stock for a deceased stock owner?
Yeah, so there's a few different options. I mean, there's if we're looking at options for buying out stock, for example, we typically will set up account structures where cash flow can be then deposited into on a regular basis from the business. If the business is funding any type of buyout or buying out stock of one of the other partners, we'll set up a separate account structure for that under the name of that business, where that's used, that the assets in that account is being used to fund the buyout. But then again, you have to have the right operating agreements and legal structures in place that spells out exactly how that's working. But fundamentally, from an account structure standpoint, we set it up so that there's an account for the business that's, that's being used to fund that buyout or to purchase that stock. If we're buying out, for example, if the owner is buying out a partner, or if there's a buyout that's happening, or if there's a succession plan for a family held business, we also see that a lot where, the parents, for example, are exiting the business. They want to transition it down, to the next generation. But they still want to capitalize and have some type of, they want to monetize and have some liquidity. So there's ways to actually design a partial buyout, while still keeping, without having to sell the whole company.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And there was just something going through my mind as we were talking that I just want to touch on from the estate planning end. And I think this is, for me, also kind of tying into why it's so important to have these kind of arrangements in place is from estate planning. And the last thing you want to deal with is having someone, business owner, unexpectedly pass and having it where the assets go, let's not even say to spouse, let's say we're now dealing 50-50 to the kids, right? And let's say we've got only one child who's involved with the business, right? Now you're forcing the situation where you have two siblings who hopefully get along, but may not after this get along, but you're forcing two siblings who may not be the best to work together. For estate planning, we definitely want to be talking with our clients to see whether it might be more appropriate, to see if we can have the business maybe go to the child who's more appropriate for the business, and then making sure that there's assets available, whether there's available assets or whether we're tying into life insurance for this. This is a great tool to be able to use to help equalize, with having some other proceeds going to the other child. So that way, if they did want to have more 50-50, a way to be able to be as equitable as possible without potentially blowing up the business. Just saying.
Got it. Thank you. I think we have a couple of questions, Lauren, that I see that maybe are coming in. If we want to pause again for some questions.
Yeah, of course. One we got was kind of how important are business valuations in regards to preparing for unforeseen circumstances?
Oh yeah, that's a great one. I could touch on it and then, I think turn it over to you, Josh. But, for our business owners, inside of the financial plan, there's a whole section of the financial plan that is dedicated to what we call other assets, including business interests, real estate. And for the business interest part of the plan, we want that to be as accurate as possible. Not only, it doesn't mean that it has to be because the owner's thinking of selling today, but if anything happens, we want that valuation in the plan to be as accurate as possible. So for our purposes, from a planning standpoint, having an accurate valuation is very important. And as it relates to preparing for what would happen to the business if, God forbid, the business had to unwind today, Josh, if you could speak to that from a kind of a legal standpoint, how important that is.
Yeah, I mean, whether, so I guess one is in terms of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis with the business. For my clients who are venture backed, a big part of compensation going to employees oftentimes are stock options. And so those companies will be getting regular valuations to comply with IRS regulations. But even those valuations tend to be discounted for a variety of discounting principles that valuation experts can take for purposes of pricing stock options. So that's not really the same. So just if you ever hear anybody talking about a 409A valuation, that's a different sort of valuation than a valuation done to value the business as a whole on a sort of sale basis. So, in my world, I would expect on an unexpected situation like this to have a process in place, but it might trigger, right? The actual event might be the trigger that leads to the company engaging that advisor. Now, for thinking about it from an estate planning standpoint, I'll turn it to Tiff, right? If you're thinking about trying to take actions in advance in order to do some estate planning activities, then you will want to make sure you've got some degree of regular valuation done as you go through that process. And I'm going to quickly run out of things I know about this, so I'm going to stop talking and let Tiff take it over.
So yeah, so for our purposes, for estate planning purposes, for our purposes, and assuming the person's still living, we want to have an idea. So, for me telling them, well, okay, you want the business to go to one kid and you're going to have other assets go to other kids. Well, we need to know what other assets we need, right? So it's going to help us figure out what the funding is that's needed in order to be able to make sure we can be equitable. If we're starting to do gifting of business interests, we need to know what the business is valued at, so we know what kind of gift is being made and how we need to stretch it out. So valuations do come into the estate planning realm quite a bit.
And real quick, Tiff, right? In terms of if I'm a business owner and I am thinking about selling my business in 2 or 3 years time, is that the best time to come talk to you, or should I not come talk to you until like 2 weeks out from the sale?
If you've reached the age of 18, you should come talk to me. The sooner the better. And I think this is for all of us. So I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think, Josh, this is for you, and Jonathan, this is for you too. This is something where we want to get involved early. And so if you're thinking, is it too early? Well, come talk to us. We can let you know if it's too early or not. But at least by us being involved on the front end, we can help counsel on that. Please don't, and I'm looking at, yeah, okay, this person's not on this, so I can kind of speak on this. But please don't be the person who reached out to me last week and said that they are just signing now to have their business sold and they want to do gifting. We need to know a while ago to make this happen. So this is something, even though we might be able to work fast in getting certain documents in place, that doesn't mean the government or the IRS is going to be happy that we worked so fast. They're going to want to see that this has been over a period of time. So please, 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 we want a long runway on this one.
Yeah,
John?
more often than not, people, have are planning too late than too early. That's quite more common. So I would say it's really never too early, for planning purposes to be thinking about all of these things. So yeah, Lauren, was there another question that I saw come through?
Yeah, thank you guys. Those are perfect answers. This one I think kind of ties back into what we were talking about a little bit earlier, but do you guys have any suggestions for selecting the right life insurance policies or combination of policies for a business owner and their family?
Jonathan, I think this would be you taking it off.
Yeah, my light keeps turning off in here. Sorry about that. The motion sensor. So I think it really depends on how many owners there are, what I've seen for different types of life insurance structures within a buy-sell arrangement, for example, where the company owns a policy and it's paid for also by the company. The premiums are paid by the company. And then you have the insured be the owner or owners. And that really depends on how long they want that policy to go for. So it could be potentially a term life insurance policy, which is less expensive typically than permanent or cash value insurance. And there's pros and cons to that. The negative could be that the term policy will run out at some point, and if the estimation on all the owners on how long they needed that policy for changes, then they'll have to get another term. They'll have to renew. They could potentially become uninsurable during that period. So there's considerations there. There are policies I know, and the life insurance specialists that I work with go into the details of all this, but there are some renewable term policies that I believe you don't necessarily have to, claim your, have medical testing done again to see if you're insurable. But then there's also permanent coverage with cash value, which has some advantages as well, because then you could potentially build up a bucket of money in the cash value of that insurance structure so that after at a certain point, now the policy pays for itself. And so you don't have to keep paying the premiums because you've paid, there are 10 pay products where you pay over 10 years, for example, and the policy is paid for. So, those are different structures, but usually the way it's set up through a buy sell where I've seen it is, the owner of the policy is the company owns it, it's funded by the company, and then the insured are, are the owners, and then the company is the beneficiary. You could also set it up where the spouses are beneficiaries, but if you're using it for purposes of keeping the company alive and keeping the company going, usually the owner would be the beneficiary, so that the whole purpose is if, look, 50% of businesses fail because of unintended consequences. So if you need to make sure that if, God forbid, if the owner is the business, and if, God forbid, something happened today, how can there be a funding structure in place that just keeps that business going, until that key person is found again? It could take some time. Josh, would you add anything else you would add to that?
No, I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's like any other aspect, right? I'm going to rely on folks in Jonathan's position, and also, good insurance brokers, right? That's part of your advisory team. You want somebody who, they have a job, right? They're trying to sell you insurance, but they will give you good, solid advice, and they're looking out for you. So yeah, a combination of relying on advisors and seeing what's out there in the marketplace. But that's it's a valuable tool.
Absolutely. Yeah, and our process is we approach it from a holistic planning standpoint to help the owners determine structurally what might make sense. And then we bring in insurance specialists that are extensions of our team, that can really help dive deep into scenario modeling of this type of policy versus that type of policy, the pros, the cons, cash flow, and so this way it becomes an informed decision when that time comes, for the owners and for the company to decide what type of policy structure would ultimately make sense. Any
And
other
then-
questions there? Oh, go ahead, Tiff, please.
I was gonna say, then just from the estate planning end, I'll just say, mention again. I don't think you can start looking at this too soon for what type of policy is appropriate for you, because again, you never know how insurable you're going to be. And it could end up being something where it's like you're fine, but for the insurance company, they don't like it, and therefore you're not qualifying for whatever policy that you're trying to get to. So look at it sooner than later.
Yeah, and that's not only for life insurance, but disability is a big one as well. A lot of the medical practices that we work with, they have a group disability policy, that is designed so that if one of the key producers or partners, practitioners, surgeons, that is responsible for 30% of the revenue per year suddenly becomes disabled, that there is a policy that will kick in to provide for a portion of that loss of revenue. And that's just an example of, if a surgeon or a doctor in a medical practice becomes disabled.
Yeah, thank you guys. Those are very great answers for two thoughtful questions. So I appreciate that. And those were the two that we had right now. So I'll pass it back over to you. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, one thing I'll talk about, and Josh, Tiff, please, in the last 10 minutes we have here, I'll talk a little bit about is just the impact that owner dependency, can have on the valuation of the company. And so a lot of times people just think of risk management as everything we just talked about, but it's also, if you're trying to sell your company and you have a company that is very what we call owner dependent, meaning you are the company and everything operates through you, your business is significantly less valuable to a buyer than if you are a company that is what we call independent of the owner, meaning your business, your company can operate with or without you, really, because you've set it up that way. So you need to have strong, what we look at the four intangible capitals. You need to have, strong human capital, strong customer capital, strong structural capital, and strong social capital. And we look at all those aspects. The structural capital is so important. It's the systems, the processes of the organization that, everything is documented, how things are supposed to work so that somebody else could step in and fill that role. And, same with your customer capital. If, you're a business that has customers, and if the customers are, solely dependent on that owner, that's less valuable to a buyer than if you're a company where, the buyer knows that those customers are there for the company either way, with or without that specific owner. And then just the human capital, that's your talent, that's your employees, your management team, your staff, that can help, but it's not just all on the owner. There's other key executives, other people within the organization that make that company what it is. Which stems down into the social capital for the organization as well. So I don't know if you guys would add anything to that, but I think it ties in with, decentralizing the owner, and then you have businesses, dependent on the owner versus that can operate independent of the owner.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Jonathan, right? And it's really, what are you in business for, right? That's a key question. You can have a great business that sustains what you're trying to do. You're not, envisioning a scenario in which you're going to raise outside money. You're not, it's a lifestyle business, and it's going to get you from now until you're ready to retire. And that, that's sort of the end of it, right? That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's a different thought than most, right? You've built something, and you want to be able to have some degree of exit beyond just turning out the lights, ideally, if you've truly built something. But if what you've built is just in your brain and no one can truly replicate it, then I agree entirely with Jonathan, right? The value that you bring to a third party that would want to acquire your business is drastically reduced because no one will be able to do it the way you've done it. So, finding ways to de-risk that, bring people into the fold. I know for my early stage companies, I don't love it when it's a single founder who comes to me, says, I've got this idea, right? It may end up working and it may end up being fine, and they might bring in some other folks along the way. But any investment that a venture fund is going to look at that only has one key founder, they're going to be particularly concerned about that for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is what happens if this person gets hit by a bus or decides that they, you know what, I'm not interested in this anymore. I want to do something else.
Yeah.
Right.
And just to, I was just going to add to I imagine some people are probably thinking, so yes, that makes sense, to not have a company that's owner dependent. If I am a company that is obviously owner dependent, what do I do? How do I become independent? How do I make my company operate independent of the owner? So we help with that. We have a process. We do we call it our business assessment. We'll look at all those areas of intangible capital, look at your structural capital, look at your human capital. We have a whole detailed assessment we do that can help identify how you can improve in those areas, how you can de-risk, as Josh just said. And then we have outside partners that we partner up with that can really roll up the sleeves and take a deep dive into putting the necessary measures in place to de-risk the company and, put a plan in place to basically make it so that, yes, today your company might be what we consider owner dependent, but here are the steps we take, and we break it up into bite-sized action plan steps, sprints of, for the next 6 months, do these things, next 6 months, do these things. And then once those things are accomplished, you're working more toward a company that is operating independent of the owner. Tiff, you were going to say?
Yeah, no, I was just going to surprisingly agree with you guys. And it really, again, it just comes down to what are your goals? And it is totally fine if you're like, I want a business that is completely owner dependent. Well, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
And then you might just be more concerned with, and again, and I know that I did not come up with this, but it's knowing what you want for the end game.
That's right.
The waters are calm is crucial, because that way, if you do want it to be owner dependent, well, then are you all set up for yourself and for your family if something should happen, incapacity upon passing? Do you have everything in place for it? And then if you don't want it to be owner dependent, taking those steps that these fine gentlemen were talking about to make sure that things can continue to operate, crucial.
Yeah, but I think that's a great place, Tiff, to kind of wrap things up with exactly what you just said. It's really where it all starts when we have a conversation about planning for unintended consequences. The first thing that should be talked about is, what do you want to happen as the owner? What are your goals? And if God forbid something happened and there was a disability or incapacitation or a death or a divorce or a disagreement, what do you want to happen? How do you want it to look? And that's something that most owners can at least articulate. Here's what I would want. How to make it happen, that's where the professionals come in to help you make that happen and set it up correctly. But really understanding what your goals are, what do you really want to happen? How should it all look in a perfect world? That's really where it starts. So any other questions at all from our listeners before we wrap up? Anything that's come through, Lauren, at all?
No, nothing else has come through. I think you guys summed it up all perfectly, and this was great, and I learned a lot myself, so thank you guys.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Tiff. Thank you, Josh. Appreciate your expertise and insights as always. So valuable. And to our listeners, thank you for taking the time to listen in today. Hopefully you got some key takeaways. If you have any other questions at all that you're thinking about, or if any questions come to mind later, don't hesitate to reach out to Josh, Tiff, or myself. We're happy to answer any questions and be a helpful resource however we can.